Thank you. Today we're considering the lives of immigrants, refugees, and creative, honest, hardworking people caught up in war-torn places who only want to live a reasonable, healthy, and fulfilling life in a safe place. The native peoples whose settlement on this continent predates European arrivals by millennia had their lives drastically changed by the doctrine of discovery. One might say that they're essentially refugees in their own land. In his novel entitled They're There, author Tommy Orange speaks to his people's struggles when he says, "We are the memories we don't remember, which live in us, which we feel, which make us sing and dance and pray the way we do. Feelings from memories that flare and bloom unexpectedly in our lives like blood through a blanket, from a wound made by a bullet, fired by a man shooting us in the back for our hair, for our heads, for a bounty, or just to get rid of us." That was a bit of tough love this morning for all of you, and I hope you're okay with it. I think we can't, as Heather mentioned this morning when I was chatting with her about this, we can't sugarcoat this stuff. So, good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Whidbey Island. My name is Ruth Richards, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here, whether you have lived here all your life or have recently immigrated or sought refuge here. Each one of you makes our community more diverse and more whole. Thanks for choosing to spend your morning here. Welcome to Heather Good McCoy and Darren McCoy, our musicians today. It is always such a great pleasure to have both of you here. Thank you to our tech crew, Mavis Kaufman and Sarah Richards on Zoom, without whom we could not offer remote attendance and all the screen work and camera shots and all the rest. Thank you to Gary and Cynthia for providing coffee and refreshments after the service. We're in the final week of our pledge drive. Please return all pledge cards by next Sunday. You can still sign up for cottage gatherings on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday and Sunday this week. Stop by the table out in the foyer after the service for all that information if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Our guest speaker this morning is Kurt Holting. He's sitting up front here, so you'll see him face on in a few minutes. He's got lifelong roots in the Pacific Northwest, having grown up on the shores of Puget Sound. He's a graduate of Harvard Divinity School and a former United Church of Christ minister. He's also a longtime Zen student of Shodo Harada Roshi at Tahoma Zen Monastery here on Whidbey. Kurt worked summers as a commercial fisherman and wilderness guide for 50 years, including 25 years of which he was running his own company with the fabulous name of Inside Passages, which blended wilderness kayaking trips with mindfulness practice. Kurt will be speaking about his more recent work with Ukrainian refugees, and he invites all to stay after the service today to join in a conversation about the themes in this talk. I'll light the chalice this morning with words from Adam's slate. We hold that moment in our spirit when the great mosaic of humanity is treated with respect and dignity, when no person is threatened by hunger or by war, when we have extended hospitality to the stranger and tended to the sick, When equity and justice reign everywhere, then we shall all be free. We light this flame to hold that moment in our spirit and in our minds until we can make it real. Please join us in reciting our affirmation. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its practice. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another. These lightly edited words of Stacy Wilson Forsberg, who's an associate professor of human rights and human diversity at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, seem to me a good place to start this morning. Picture Central America, that sinuous land bridge south of Mexico and continuing through Panama to South America. The Northern Triangle region, made up of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, experiences endemic poverty, extremely high homicide rates, and widespread gang activity. These dire circumstances drive migration flows to the north, as you can imagine. The United States, until recently, was the northern destination of choice for Central American asylum seekers. It was a promised land where they would find personal security and economic prosperity. However, recent newcomers to Mexico are unlikely to embark on a futile 2,500-mile journey to cross that country into the United States. This journey is increasingly more dangerous, and the U.S.-Mexico border is more difficult to cross at both official and unofficial ports of entry. Mexican President Amber Alert. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador recently directed officials at the Mexico-Guatemala border to distribute humanitarian visas to the caravans. These allow the Central Americans to live and work in Mexican territory for 1 year while they navigate the country's refugee determination process. In doing this, Mexico is attempting to fulfill its international obligation to refugees, but now the asylum seekers are stranded in Mexico. Their journey has left them in a state of limbo and in a location where they did not intend to stay permanently. And Mexico's refugee protection system is massively under-resourced and unprepared to handle so many asylum cases. One tiny bright spot is that some asylum seekers holding humanitarian visas can reside in temporary migrant shelters called albergues. Mexico City is home to several albergues that divide guests by age and gender. Albergue Tochan, for one, responds to the basic needs of its all-male residents, including a bed, clothing, and meals. The inn is a clean, warm, welcoming home, but it is always over capacity, with more need than beds. As a researcher, Professor Wilson Forsberg recognizes that she can't help the asylum seekers, the thousands of Central Americans who are stranded in Mexico. But she says, I can help tell their stories. I believe stories can bring some humanity to a population that has been vilified and rendered nameless by recent political discourse. The men at Tochan speak about their current reality as they describe their daily activities, frustrations, and coping mechanisms. They narrate their hopes and aspirations for the future, and detail the abuses they've endured in their past. They worry that their asylum claims will be rejected, resulting in official and permanent eviction from Mexico. And they're keen to have their stories documented. Many ask that they be identified in publications so that they can leave a piece of themselves behind should they not survive. As days become weeks and weeks turn into months, waiting defines their identity. Some of the men report no longer knowing who they are anymore or what they're waiting for. They use descriptors such as useless, not even human, impotent, powerless, like a beggar, and living half-lives. Anxiety, uncertainty, and lack of control over one's life and future are a huge part of the collective experience of the men at Tochan. But they have found some solace in art. With the assistance of local artists, and the director of Albergue Tochan has introduced art as therapy and as a source of income for the guests. The men have gradually found ways to express themselves through art while daily, weekly, monthly, they wait. They create and sell wooden artesanías, masks, and paintings. They paint enormous colorful murals that cover virtually the entire exterior of the inn and the surrounding neighborhood. While painting together, the asylum seekers find a level of comfort and unity as they learn to trust and rely on each other. As their initial dream of reaching the United States falters during the long wait at the albergue, the men learn to embrace a Mexican hope, the possibility of finding some meaning in a new location while waiting for an uncertain future. In 1991, Ukraine declared independence from Russia. Since then, there's been a continuous tug of war between the European Union and Russia for control of the country. Two sisters, twins, were born in 1992 and have seen little peace and a lot of horror and loss in their brief lives, including the loss of every member of their immediate family. Understandably, the sisters do not want to be separated. The conditions in their town have now reached a point where the sisters have decided they must emigrate with their families. Lois Chowan, a member here of UUCWI, whom many of you know, is hoping to aid these two families as they flee to the U.S. As you can imagine, it takes a huge effort to establish yourself as a refugee in a completely different country. It's also complicated for those of us here to know how can we best offer support. Who's overseeing the transition? Where can immigrants find legal help? Who can you trust with your donation? The questions are many, the answers slow in coming. In preparing for this service, I've kind of had a crash course in the complexity of all the issues, challenges, and obstacles surrounding immigration. And through it all, I do want to remember, keep very much in the front of my mind, that for the thousands and thousands of people in this predicament, every single one is an individual with basic human needs and hopes, fears, and aspirations. Today, our dedicated offering is for Ukrainian Community Center of Washington, headquartered in Seattle and Renton. The center has provided immigration services as well as behavioral health and social services for the past 30 years. Thank you for your generosity for the displaced people among us. With a solar eclipse poised tomorrow to remind us how incidental all our actions and anxieties are, an eclipse to remind us that we all have a bit of the stuckness that Kurt's reading, which he's going to do. I think I just cut him off. We'll hear from him in a second. I'm sorry. An eclipse to remind us of a global political trajectory that seems to be relentless in its attempts to shatter our optimism and resolve. An eclipse to remind us how blessed we are to live on this miraculous planet with a moon that is such a precise size and distance from both Earth and Sun that it exactly covers the Sun for viewers on Earth who are in the path of totality. With all these reminders, we are all carrying a lot of mixed joys and sorrows these days.
Good morning. The reading I chose today is from one of my favorite novels, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. If your mind is truly profoundly stuck, then you may be much better off than when it is loaded with ideas. The solution to the problem often at first seems unimportant or undesirable, but the state of stuckness allow it in time to assume its true importance. It seemed small because your previous rigid evaluation, which led to the stuckness, made it small. But now consider the fact that no matter how hard you try to hang on to it, this stuckness is bound to disappear. Your mind will naturally and freely move toward a solution. Unless you are a real master at staying stuck, you can't prevent this. The fear of stuckness is needless because the longer you stay stuck, the more you see the quality, the reality that gets you unstuck every time. What's really getting you stuck is the running from the stuckness through the cars of your train of knowledge, looking for a solution that is out in front of the train. Stuckness shouldn't be avoided. It is the physical predecessor of all real understanding. Good morning. First of all, Ruth covered a lot of the issues, things that are on my heart that I'll be sharing. There will be a lot of overlap, which is a good thing. Two confessions. First, I wasn't invited here. I invited myself. So thank you for indulging me. And Ruth has already blown my cover on this, but the second confession, which is something I don't normally let out in public, is that I am a recovering clergyman. And the fact that I'm up here at all this morning shows that one can never be completely certain of one's recovery when it comes to ministry. So after leaving the formal ministry in 1980, I did the next most obvious thing. I became a commercial fisherman and wilderness guide in Alaska. I also began a Zen practice, which became the launching pad for much of my later work in the world. For most of the last 30 years, I led mindfulness-based kayaking retreats in the wilderness of Southeast Alaska. Tom and Tara were on one of those retreats, and Rick Payne, and and Bill also was on one of those retreats. And you could say, I have always felt that this really became the new form that my ministry took. I was reminded repeatedly along the way, you're a good pastor or you're a good rabbi. So it's hard to escape these things. 2021 was my last season guiding in Alaska, and when it was time for me to let that go, I felt stuck for a while. Who am I now that I'm not that person anymore? My intention, my mission for all those years of teaching and guiding in Alaska was to introduce people to a vastly more than human world, to open cracks into a wider sense of self, a more direct and visceral experience of the connection to life that far surpasses our merely human one. So like many people at the end of a career, I felt stuck for a while. There's one thing that I've learned from my Zen practice, and that is that being stuck is not necessarily a bad thing. It's uncomfortable for sure. But to be stuck is ultimately to be forced outside of our comfort zone. Some of our most important insights and creative leaps grow out of the morass of stuckness. At least that's been my experience. And we're living now, clearly, I mean, the theme of my sermon, Embracing the Storm, we're living in a time that that has been called polycrisis more recently, which I think is a good term, a tangled web of ecological and social and political stuck places on a big scale, in some ways unique to all of human history. A situation known in thermodynamics as far from equilibrium conditions. In Robert Pirsig's understanding, you might say that we are stuck in the middle of a whole constellation of storms. I think we're all trying to figure out what to do with that, and that certainly includes me. In the first months after ending my work in Alaska, it was both fascinating and a little unnerving to allow myself to have no idea what to do next. To be unmoored at times from any certainty can bring us closer to what is actually needed next. There is a Zen saying, not knowing is most intimate. Not knowing can be a challenge to let go of worn-out certainties that are no longer big enough to meet our current circumstances. It can prod us to take more creative risks, and I want to tell you just a few stories about where that intimacy of not knowing has taken me lately, and just a little bit of what I've learned that might be relevant to what Ruth was talking about earlier, and what we're all, in our own ways thinking about. During my final season of guiding in Alaska, I hired a young married couple of Zen priests named Soten Lynch and Shanae Monial as my staff on those final trips. And here was a pair who were really breaking with convention. They had spent the previous 10 years training together at a Zen monastery before they became married. And they were working in Alaska to earn money so that they could take a walk all the way through Mexico and Central America. So it was, I had my doubts about how that was going to work for them, but I also was really inspired by their audacity, especially from a place of my own stuckness. And after they had walked 1,000 miles through Mexico, I asked them if I could come and join them for a few weeks. And it was one of the most powerful creative leaps I think I have ever made. I walked with Soten and Shanae for 200 miles through the very territory Ruth was talking about, the southern part of rural Mexico, where refugees are now just pouring north illegally across the Guatemalan border. So I walked 200 miles with them from basically Oaxaca to just about the Guatemalan border. And it was not risk-free. Several times we were told by people we met along the way, don't go this way, it's too dangerous. More than once we found ourselves literally camping with Central American refugees fleeing in the opposite direction toward the promised land of El Norte. And listening to their stories in such a direct and personal and kind of vulnerable way was my first encounter with what it might feel like to be an ordinary, an ordinary good human being forcibly displaced by extreme poverty, extreme violence, facing life or death on this journey with no idea what might be at the other end. I'm really, really grateful that I had those opportunities to be present in that way. And the day after, so the day after I returned from that trip in Mexico, on February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Something about the timing of that brutal invasion and the fresh wave of refugees it unleashed hit me more deeply than it would have if my heart had not been cracked open by my recent experience with refugees in Mexico. During the early weeks of the war, I watched in expectation of imminent Russian victory. But as it became clear that the war was not going to end soon, the idea that I might go to Poland myself to help with the refugee crisis there sort of took hold. And this time I tapped into my network of fellow Zen students from Poland, a good number of whom also study with Harada Roshi, if any of you have met Harada along the way from Tahoma Zen Monastery. And I connected with a young man named Simon Obrachowski from Harada's One Drop Zen group in Szczecin, Poland, who invited me to come live with his family for as long as I wanted and connected me with relief workers in that city. Once in Szczecin, I threw myself into doing pretty much whatever was needed in whatever way I could. Organizing and delivering food to refugee families, teaching conversational English to Ukrainian teenagers, sharing music, guitar music with displaced younger school children from Ukraine, sharing mindfulness practices with caregivers who are working under extraordinary levels of stress. And it wasn't that I was doing anything special. It was that I was doing something, and that I was doing it with other caring human beings that brought not only relief from the illusion of my own powerlessness, but deep companionship in the effort simply to take my place on deck during a storm. I experienced joy. And the surprising paradox that comes with turning toward what is difficult and unwanted. A sense of aliveness that I had not experienced in a long time. My third recent opportunity, I just want to briefly touch on, for having my mind and heart blown open, came last summer as an outgrowth of my experience in Poland the summer before. My friend Simon asked if I would travel to Kyiv, Ukraine, with him to help him host a Zen peace vigil there. His vision was to do this as a full 7-day Zen-style retreat, which he would lead, but with me offering some talks and tools and exercises from my work as a secular mindfulness teacher, since that's just more relevant to ordinary people. And through Simon's contacts in Szczecin and the man that I worked with there named Yannick, we were able to collaborate with the Dock Theater of Contemporary Arts in Kyiv, who turned over their entire theater space to us for a full week and offered support and meals and local knowledge. Because of the continuing war and the almost daily missile attacks still occurring in Kyiv, recruitment of participants was not so easy. But we did end up with a strong core group of 5 seasoned Zen practitioners from Ukraine, Poland, and the US, and 1 secular mindfulness teacher from Kyiv named Walter Paszkowski, who guided us in the city and has become a person I now count among my closest friends. It was a fairly grueling 24-hour bus trip from Szczecin to Kyiv, and once there it took some days for us to fully arrive and settle. As anyone who has done a silent retreat knows, it takes time to create trust and safety in a group that may have started out as strangers. It took time to experiment with our ritual structure that it could hold us on task in highly unpredictable circumstances. And it took time to fine-tune the technologies that you guys have going here that allowed us to share this with others through live streaming. There are so many amazing stories and gratitudes I could share from this retreat. To our surprise, we did not find a city acting like it was under siege. Instead, we found ourselves in a thriving European city, habituated to its wartime footing and going about its life with surprising resilience and vigor. We were able to walk freely within the city before and after the retreat and during daily outdoor walking meditation periods each morning. Far from the front lines, we still found ourselves in a new kind of high-tech war in which everyone had cell phone apps that alerted them in real time to any missiles or drones that had entered Ukrainian airspace, what level of danger they carried and when they would arrive. This helped us gauge when and if it was necessary to seek shelter. Our intention was simply to listen and be present as fully as we could to the human tragedy unfolding in Ukraine, for Russians as well as Ukrainian citizens, and to deepen our own practice in response to this manifestation of human suffering. It is hard to know or measure the worth of such a venture by external circumstances. If our success could be measured at all, it would be by the extent to which we were able to hold our hearts open, to cultivate compassion for the victims of this war on all fronts, and to connect deeply with each other in the midst of events that none of us could fully grasp or begin to control. Walter, my mindfulness colleague from Kyiv, who was part of this retreat, shared this reflection during the closing council that we held at the end of our retreat. Quote, "As the days passed, my mind became clearer. The challenges of others became less important than my own, and mine became more bearable. In just a week, a profound transformation took place on the humble stage at Dock Theater, turning complete strangers into good friends and sowing seeds of unpredictable potential beyond the time and space we occupied. And although I do not have the power to stop this war, some part of the war ended this week inside of me. My takeaway, and what I most want to share here, is that the benefits of taking healing action in difficult times are available to all of us, even in the most humble and ordinary of circumstances. They don't have to be dramatic to harness healing power. There are storms now on every horizon: ecological, social, cultural, political. The only thing we can be sure of is that we will continue to face these storms, and they are touching our lives ever more directly. We will be confronted forever with the question, how then shall I live? It's easy to feel overwhelmed and easy to turn away. But if we succumb to the illusion that we are powerless to act, then apathy and despair will take their seats on each side of us. And they will stay there as long as we sing praises to our own imagined powerlessness. Turning into these storms, taking our place on deck with other skilled hands, is a much more interesting and fruitful option. Learning to actually dance with the storms is better still. Feeling their power, allowing ourselves to hear the messages they bring about who we need to become, there is no room for apathy or despair in that scenario. So my challenge to all of us, including myself this morning, is to find that edge place within our own comfort zones and push maybe just a little beyond it. What simple actions can we take now that are in our power to take to contribute to the healing and encouragement of others and of our precious earth in this deeply unsettling time? What might we yet do but have been too afraid to try? Who might we team up with to walk us beyond these fears into healing action? Hope, as David Orr has written, is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. That, in my experience, is our place of greatest aliveness. That is the place where God lives.
Our final hymn is an unfamiliar one and not the easiest one in the hymnal either. Maybe that's why it's unfamiliar. But you can feel, if you can feel even just a little bit of the joyful rhythm, it will be worth it. Darren will play once through and then pick us up for the ride. Heather will lead us through all the verses.
Days we done with storm.
with gratitude and joy, we receive this gift of life and the endless mystery of human becoming. With strong hearts and open minds, we embrace whatever life may hold. With all our brothers and sisters and fellow species across all time, we vow to be agents of healing and sources of love, no matter the shape of the storms we may face.
As we extinguish the chalice, we ignite a flame inside ourselves. These are words from Ben Atherton Zeman. As we extinguish the flame in our chalice, we ignite a flame inside ourselves. Our commitment to our mission and to one another is an unquenchable flame. Until we light this flame again, let us remember that we are not alone.
Everybody wants to be loved. Don't give up, because you are loved. Don't give up. It's just the hurt that you hide. When you're lost inside, I'll be there to find you. Don't give up, because you want to burn bright. If darkness blinds you, I will shine to guide you. Everybody wants to be understood. Well, I can hear